What if you discovered that your own son treats a stranger with more cruelty than he would treat an enemy? At 64, Donna Regina always believed she had done everything right. She raised her son alone, with the little she had and the much she felt. He taught her respect, compassion, humility, everything he believed made someone truly human. But as the years passed, something inside her began to tighten. The son she used to put to sleep with stories of kindness now spoke arrogantly. The boy who shared bread with his friends on the street now turned his face away so as not to see those in need. And every time Regina saw this, she felt a small crack inside her. Until, one quiet afternoon, while tidying the small kitchen, she heard a phrase on a community radio station that struck her like a warning. A good son treats his mother well, but a son of character treats anyone well. Regina stopped. She held the wet plate between her fingers, not realizing the water was dripping. It was as if that phrase had been spoken directly to her, a whisper from destiny. Something hurt, and it wasn't because of her. It was because of who her son was becoming. And that same night, alone in her room, she made a decision she didn't even know if she would have the courage to carry out. A silent decision, impossible to explain to anyone, but necessary. She gathered old clothes. She smeared dirt on her face. She tied her hair back with a worn scarf, and she put on a coat that no longer kept anyone warm. In the mirror, she didn't recognize the woman she saw, but she needed to see how her son treated someone who, in the real world, he considered insignificant. The next day, she stood in the square where he passed on his way to work. When he approached, Regina held out her hand, asking only for a glass of water. Her son stopped. He looked at her as if she were looking at a piece of trash on the ground. And he said, with a contempt she had never heard in her life, "Get out of the way, old woman. Go beg someone who has pity." She didn't answer, nor did she need to, because at that moment, Regina didn't just discover what her son did to others. He discovered something much more painful, who he really was. And what would come next, he could never have imagined. Regina's story didn't begin that day in the square. It began much earlier, in a simple house with doors always open, where love was never lacking, even when everything else was. Regina had been a single mother since she was 19. The boy's father disappeared even before her belly grew. And she, so young, so scared, learned the hard way that sometimes the world places responsibilities on a woman's shoulders that should never be hers, but that she embraces anyway. She worked in 2 family homes. She woke up before sunrise, prepared coffee for her employers, cleaned, cooked, and then rushed to pick up her son from daycare. At night, she did odd jobs washing clothes for neighbors. She was so tired that she often fell asleep in her uniform, but she never failed to smile when her son called her my heroine. Regina didn't have luxury, but she had values, and she passed them on to her son like one gives gold. Be humble, my son. Respect everyone, even the poorest. What we give to the world comes back to us. And for a long time, it seemed he understood. He was a sweet, polite boy with a good heart. But the world sometimes steals children from loving mothers. And not with violence, it's with ego. The boy grew up, studied, and got a good job. Regina was so proud she could barely contain herself. She always told her friends, "My son succeeded. He's hardworking. He has a beautiful heart." But, little by little, that beautiful heart began to change shape. First came the comments. "Those poor people just want to take advantage. If that delivery guy were smart, he wouldn't be in that profession. I work hard. People who are poor because they don't try." Each phrase was like a pebble falling into Regina's chest. She tried to correct him. "My son, don't talk like that. You know what it's like to have nothing." But he rolled his eyes. "Oh, Mom, you're too nice. That's why you're always getting taken advantage of." Then came the gestures. The way he looked down on her. Impatience with those who earned little. Lack of kindness. Regina began to observe closely. At the restaurant, he treated waiters as if they were invisible. In the building, he ignored the doorman who greeted him. On the street, he avoided homeless people as if they were garbage. She, always by his side, shrank into her seat, her heart aching, until one day something broke inside her, a day she could never forget. They were walking together, and a homeless man approached, asking for a piece of bread. Regina automatically reached into her purse, but her son was quicker. "Go to work, you bum! Stop bothering me!" His voice was so harsh, so cold, so full of contempt that Regina felt her soul wither. The homeless man slowly retreated, and Regina, too, but not from her place. She retreated within herself. She looked at her son and didn't recognize him. It was as if life, with all her efforts, had created not a man, but a wall that saw no one but itself. That night, Regina sat on the edge of the bed, her hands in her lap, staring at the floor. She went over every sacrifice she had made, every sleepless night, every shared meal, every postponed dream, and she asked herself, where did I lose my boy? But the question that hurt the most was, does he treat everyone like this when I'm not around? That's when doubt turned to fear. Fear turned to sadness, and sadness turned into the decision that would change everything. Regina realized that talking wasn't enough, advising wasn't enough, asking wasn't enough. She needed to see with her own eyes who her son was when no one was watching. She needed to face the truth, however cruel it might be. And it was this need, painful but necessary, that made a 64-year-old mother put on old clothes and put her love to the test. The following days were like repeated pages of a book Regina already knew by heart, but which now she read with different eyes. She began to observe her son with a different kind of silence. Not that motherly silence that avoids arguments, but the silence of someone who senses an abyss slowly opening up, too slowly for the other to notice, too quickly for her to stop. Every morning, Regina prepared coffee for the two of them. He set the table with care, as he always did. And he would arrive fiddling with his cell phone, answering work messages, talking loudly about business, goals, profits, as if the world revolved around his own voice. She tried to start a conversation, asking about his day, about people, about life. He would answer dryly, impatiently, as if each of her attempts were an annoyance passed down from generation to generation. What Regina saw most, however, was the contempt hidden in small gestures. The way he spoke to the woman at the bakery when buying bread, the way he treated ride-sharing drivers as if they were personal employees, and above all, the way he completely ignored anyone who wasn't dressed like him, didn't speak like him, didn't live where he lived. One day, while tidying the living room, Regina heard him shouting on the phone, "I have no patience for incompetent people. If that doorman doesn't do what I ask, I'll complain, and that's it." She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling her heart clench. This wasn't the boy she had raised. It couldn't be. That week, Regina decided to observe him even more closely, and everything she saw only reinforced the pain. One day, they went to the supermarket together. The cashier, a humble young man, smiled at her son. "Good afternoon, sir." He didn't even look up. He just threw the groceries onto the conveyor belt and said, "Quick, I'm in a hurry." Regina felt such deep shame that she almost apologized for her son, but she held back. She just wanted to understand. She wanted to find, deep within that adult man, the trace of the boy she had raised with so much sacrifice. But it seemed that trace was disappearing. Later that night, Regina tried to speak. "My son, it doesn't cost anything to be kind. Life gives everything back." He laughed. "Mom, that's the kind of talk people say when they don't know how the world works. In my line of work, if you're weak, everyone takes advantage of you." She tried to insist. "But you have to remember who you were." He got angry. "That's enough, Mom. You live in the past." Those words hurt more than anything else. Because deep down, Regina knew that his past was the most beautiful thing about him. The boy who shared his clothes, who helped elderly neighbors, who held her hand when they crossed dark streets. But that boy seemed buried under a thick layer of pride. The situation became even more bitter when, one Sunday afternoon, she accompanied him to the church near the neighborhood. As they left, a homeless man approached, asking for a plate of food. Before Regina could say anything, her son was direct. "Go to work. Everyone wants everything handed to them. Get out of here." His voice echoed through the parking lot, and Regina felt her face burn, not with second-hand embarrassment, but with maternal shame. At that moment, she didn't just see a cold man talking to a poor person. She saw her own son, her own flesh and blood, directing cruelty at someone defenseless. And it was in that instant, in that split second that lasted an eternity, that Regina understood that it was no use advising, talking, or pleading anymore. It was as if his soul was sleeping, and she needed to wake him, in a way she had never tried before. It was that night, while making the bed, that Regina made the decision that would change everything. A decision that, even to her, seemed like madness. She would give up her own appearance, her own identity, her own external dignity, to see the truth about her own son's character. Not for revenge, never for revenge, but for love. A desperate, worried, wounded love, but still love. She prepared her old clothes. She picked out a worn handkerchief she found at the back of the wardrobe. She adjusted her face until she looked like a stranger in the mirror. And with a heart as heavy as stone, she decided, tomorrow, I will find out who my son really is. The following morning, when Regina woke up, she didn't feel the usual comfort of routine. She felt the weight of someone about to cross a bridge of no return. She held the old handkerchief in her hands, as if holding courage. She took several deep breaths before putting on those clothes that smelled of abandonment, dust, and oblivion. Each piece she put on took away a little of the woman she was, and dressed the woman she needed to be. In front of the mirror, Regina saw another person. Her eyes, always so lively, were half covered by disheveled hair. Her face, dirty with carefully spread earth, seemed more tired than it really was. Even so, inside her, there was a silent strength, a strength that only mothers have when they need to do something impossible out of love. She left home slowly, so as not to attract her son's attention. I knew exactly the route he took every day. I knew the times. I knew where he would pass. When she arrived at the square, she saw other homeless people scattered on the benches, talking quietly, trying to survive the morning cold. They didn't find her presence strange, perhaps because pain recognizes other pain, even when it's disguised. Regina blended in among them, but her heart was racing so fast it felt like it wanted to tear her chest apart. She repeated to herself, "It's for him. It's for my son." At 7:13 a.m., as always, he appeared, walking quickly, impeccably dressed, an expression of superiority molded by haste, his cell phone glued to his ear, as if the world urgently needed his voice. Regina saw her own son without being seen, and that hurt more than anything. She waited for him to put the phone away. He waited for a second when he could get close without scaring her. But the truth is, she was trembling so much that any movement seemed risky. When he finally mustered the courage, he extended his hand. That's all. An outstretched hand, like so many others that go unnoticed in the city. "My son," she began, her voice weak, not acting but out of fear. He stopped. He looked first at her hand, then at her face, then at her dirty clothes. There was no recognition, no doubt, no hesitation. Only repulsion. "Get out of the way, old woman," he said without looking properly. "I don't have money to spare for people like you." Regina felt her legs give way, but she took a deep breath. She needed to hear more. She needed to see how far she would go. "It's just a glass of water," she murmured. He took a step back, as if she were contagious. "Don't even touch me. God forbid. You stink." Some people turned their faces away when they heard this, but nobody said anything. Nobody ever did. Regina tried to speak again, but her voice wouldn't come out. He had to swallow hard. She had to hold back tears to avoid revealing who she was. "Please." She still risked it, moved by the broken courage of a mother. It was then that the most painful phrase came, the one that pierced her chest and stayed there, throbbing like an open wound. "People like you ruin the city. Come on, let me pass." The tone of contempt wasn't that of someone angry with the world. It was someone who sincerely believed himself to be superior. Regina lowered her face, because if you looked at him for even a second, you would see her eyes, and she didn't want you to find out there, at that moment. Not while she was being cruel, not while she was being someone she didn't recognize. Her son walked past her, nudging her shoulder, not hard, but hard enough to break something inside her that was already cracked. When he took a few steps back, he still complained, "These old women should be banned from being here." And he kept walking, as if he had only removed an inconvenience from the sidewalk. Regina stood still, motionless, as if time had frozen around her. A lady sitting on the bench next to her, a real homeless woman, touched Regina's arm with compassion. "Leave it, my daughter. People like that don't know the weight of words." Regina tried to smile, tried to be strong, but when he opened his mouth, no words came out. She walked away slowly, her legs trembling, her heart crumbling street by street. Each step seemed to carry kilos of regrets, of memories, of doubts, and the question hammered in her mind. This is the son I raised? When she reached the corner of the square, she finally let the tears fall. There, where no one knew her, where there were no masks, where there was no fear of being seen. She cried not because of the humiliation, not because of the cruel words, not because of the contempt. She cried because of the certainty she had just discovered. Her son was lost, and perhaps, she had taken too long to realize it. But one thing she knew, from that day on, nothing would ever be the same again, and she still needed to decide how to reveal the truth, and if he would be ready to hear it. Regina returned home as if carrying a soulless body. Her legs walked, but her thoughts, those were so distant, they seemed to echo inside an empty tunnel. When she closed the door behind her, she took off the scarf, took off her old clothes, wiped the dust from her face, and the woman who appeared in the mirror was not the same one who had left hours before. She was someone broken inside, in a way that makes no sound, but destroys. She stood there, staring at her own reflection. For a few seconds, she didn't even blink. She wanted to see in her own eyes if the pain was real, if it had really happened, if her son, that boy she had cradled in her arms, whom she had raised with sacrifice, whom she had defended from the world, had been capable of throwing stones at her without knowing it. Regina ran her fingers along the sink, trying to find some point of firmness amidst the emotional numbness. She sat at the kitchen table. The silence seemed to scream louder than any words. And then she remembered the past. Because when the present hurts too much, the mind tries to cling to what was once safe. She remembered her young son, holding her face with his little hands dirty with mud. She remembered him running around the house, saying he would be a good man, just like you, Mom. She remembered when he cried at school because he saw a classmate being humiliated, and she was so proud of that. She relived everything, as if life were rubbing in her face that sweet boy had disappeared. The question returned, tearing at her inside. Where did I lose you, my son? Her eyes burned, but she refused to completely collapse. No mother falls all at once. She falls in pieces, slowly, because love tries to hold her even when there's nowhere left to go. She placed her hand on her chest. There was a physical pain there, as if someone had squeezed her heart too hard. It was the pain of disappointment, the pain of acknowledging her own failure, or at least the pain of believing she had failed. Regina had always been afraid of growing old alone, but she never, ever imagined she would grow old ashamed of her own son. For a long time, she stood there, motionless, listening only to the kitchen clock. Each tick-tock seemed to say, "He didn't recognize you. He didn't recognize you. He didn't recognize." Regina rested her head in her hands, and she cried. But it wasn't a desperate, loud, explosive cry. It was a muffled cry. The kind of cry that only comes when the soul can no longer feign strength. After nearly an hour lost within herself, she stood up. He crossed the hallway slowly. He opened the door to his son's room, the room he rarely used now, because he hardly ever appeared to see her. His scent was still there, subtle, mixed with memories. She touched the desk where he studied as a child. She ran her hand over the old photos. She pressed one of them against her chest. In that photo, he was 7 years old. His smile was so sincere, so light, so free of any arrogance. Regina closed her eyes and whispered, "Where are you, my son? Where did the world swallow you up?" She took a deep breath. She knew she couldn't dwell on the pain. She knew she needed to think. She needed to decide what to do with all of this. Part of her wanted to forget him for a while. Part of her wanted to confront him immediately. Part of her wanted to hug her son and believe that it was all just a misunderstanding. But there was another part, the most wounded part, that said, he needs to learn. He needs to see who he's become. Regina stayed awake all night. She tossed and turned. She shifted positions. But the scene kept repeating in her mind. Get out of the way, old woman. People like you ruin the city. Each phrase was a new blow. When the sun rose, her eyes were tired, but her mind was different. For the first time since it all happened, she realized something important. She didn't want to punish him. She didn't want to humiliate him either. She didn't want revenge. She only wanted to save her son from the worst kind of poverty of character. And to do that, she needed to look inside him and make him look inside himself. So Regina made the decision that would change everything. She would reveal the truth, but she wouldn't do it angrily. She would do it firmly, with dignity, with pain transformed into courage. And for that moment to be truly transformative, he needed to hear not the pain of the homeless woman he had humiliated, but the pain of the mother he had forgotten to see. The day set for dinner arrived. Regina calmly set the table, not out of vanity, but out of respect for what that night represented. It wasn't just dinner. It was the limit between what she could still endure and what needed to change. She placed 2 simple plates, aligned the silverware, and turned on a soft light in the room. She didn't have luxury. She never had. But she had dignity, and she wanted her son to feel that from the moment he entered. Shortly after 8, the doorbell rang. Regina's heart beat faster, but she took a deep breath before turning the doorknob. When she opened the door, she found her son with his usual expression, impatient, always looking at the clock, as if his time was worth more than anyone else's. "Mom, I can't stay long. I have to get up early tomorrow," he said, entering without waiting for an invitation. Regina just smiled. You didn't need to answer. What he had to say that night didn't depend on haste. It depended on truth. They sat down at the table. He began to eat without thanking her, without asking how she was. And that's when Regina realized how hardened the world had made him, or perhaps how hardened he himself had chosen to be. After a few minutes, she settled into her chair and began the conversation in a calm, almost delicate voice. "Son, can I ask you a question? But I want you to answer me from the heart." He sighed, clearly uncomfortable. "Okay, Mom, go ahead." Regina crossed her hands on the table and asked, "Do you think you're a good man?" He looked up, surprised. "Of course I am. I work hard. I've achieved everything on my own. I do what I can. I deserve what I have." Regina watched him in silence, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't see. Then he continued, "And do you think you treat people well?" He chuckled ironically. "Mom, the world is full of lazy people. If we're not firm, they'll walk all over us." Her gaze saddened, but she didn't waver. "Firmness has nothing to do with humiliating anyone, my son." He rolled his eyes. "Here you go again with those speeches." "They're not speeches," Regina interrupted firmly, without raising her voice. "They're memories of what you once were, and what you ceased to be." He stared at her, uncomprehending, and Regina knew. This was the moment, the exact second where everything would change, for better or for worse. She reached for her purse beside the chair. She opened it slowly and pulled out the dirty, crumpled handkerchief still stained with dust. She placed it on the table between them. Her son frowned. "What's this?" Her heart tightened, but her voice came out firm, so firm that even the air seemed to stop. "It's the handkerchief I used yesterday, when you called me old and told me to get out of your way." He paled. "What? What do you mean?" "The homeless woman you humiliated," Regina said, without blinking, "was me." Silence. Absolute silence. Heavy. Cutting. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, but no words came out. Regina continued, "I was there, in front of you. I held out my hand. I only asked for a glass of water, and you treated me worse than you would treat an enemy." He shook his head, trying to deny it, but his face betrayed his memory. "No, Mom. I didn't know. I thought that I was what?" Regina asked, leaning in slightly. "That I was someone worthless? Without dignity? Unimportant?" He was speechless. Regina took a deep breath. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from truth. "Son, I wasn't testing if you would recognize me. I was testing if you would recognize a human being." His eyes filled with tears. He tried to speak, but she raised her hand and continued. "What you did wasn't a mistake. It was a reflex, a reflection of the man you've become." He put his hands to his face. completely broken. "Mom, forgive me. I didn't know. I was stressed. Regina interrupted him gently. "You didn't treat me badly because you were stressed. You treated me badly because someone poor, someone dirty, someone vulnerable, to you, is nobody." She waited for him to look up. "And that hurts me more than any word you've ever said to me." The son cried, but Regina didn't cry, because that night she wasn't the fragile mother who loved too much. She was the mother who needed to teach a lesson that would save or lose the man she had raised. She touched the soiled handkerchief with her fingertips. "I did all this because I needed to see who you were when no one was looking, and what I saw broke my heart." He swallowed hard. I want to change, Mom. I swear. Tell me how. I'll do anything." Regina took a deep breath, and her voice came out low but firm. "Start by looking at people, not clothes, not for the condition, not for the appearance. Pause. Start by looking into my eyes." He cried harder, touching her hand for the first time in a long time. "Mom, give me a chance," she sighed. "The chance isn't mine to give you, my son. It's yours to earn." The silence that followed was no longer one of pain. It was one of transformation. That dinner wasn't just the revelation of a secret. It was the rebirth of a man, and the rebirth of a mother who decided that loving is also teaching. That night didn't end with tight hugs or empty promises. It ended with a different kind of silence. It was no longer the silence of a mother afraid to speak and a son who didn't want to listen. It was the silence of two broken mirrors, facing for the first time the shards scattered on the floor. After the revelation, after the tears, after Regina's harsh but necessary phrase, her son left more quietly than he arrived. He didn't make excuses, didn't give a pretty speech, didn't try to pretend everything was all right, because it wasn't. As she closed the door, Regina rested her hand on the wood and felt the weight of the decision she had made. She knew she could have spared him. She knew she could have pretended not to see. She knew she could have followed the example of many mothers, swallowing everything to maintain the little peace that remained. But she also knew that if she did that, she would be helping her son to lose himself even more. That night, Regina lay down without crying. Not because the pain had gone away, but because, for the first time in a long time, she felt she was doing what she needed to do, even if it hurt. The following days were silent between the two. He didn't show up the next day. He didn't call. He didn't text. Regina didn't chase after him, not because she was proud, but because she knew that now it was he who needed to walk towards her, and not the other way around. She began to fill her days with her simple chores, doing laundry, tidying the house, chatting with neighbors, making her own lunch. But everything now had a different undertone, as if a part of the house was dark, and it was precisely the space her son occupied. But something began to change. On the third day, the phone rang. It was him. His voice was low, without arrogance, without that usual cold haste. "Mom, can I come over today?" She took a deep breath before answering. "Yes, you can." This time, he arrived without a suit, without a briefcase, without his cell phone glued to his hand. He entered slowly, like someone entering a waiting room for their own trial. Regina watched him in silence. He seemed smaller, not in size, but in ego, and somehow he seemed more human. "I went downtown today," he began, looking at the ground. "I saw a guy sleeping on the sidewalk. I remembered how I spoke to the man that day. And to you." Regina leaned against the sink, listening to every word. "I tried," he swallowed hard. "I tried to talk to him. I asked his name, I gave him a snack. He cried, and I had never seen anyone cry for receiving so little." He looked up, his eyes welling up. "Mom, I was a monster." Regina shook her head slowly. "No, my son, you're not a monster. But if you continued like that, you'd be an empty man." He moved a little closer. "I don't want to be that man. I didn't know I'd become so hardened. It all happened so fast. Work, money, recognition. And I thought being respected meant being feared." Pause. "I forgot what you taught me." That sentence touched Regina deeply, because it was true. She had planted good seeds, but the world had thrown many stones on top of them. "The world taught you wrong," she replied calmly. "But you're not obligated to keep repeating those lessons." He took a deep breath. "I want to change, Mom." Regina didn't smile immediately. She didn't hug him right away. She didn't applaud the sentence. She knew that true repentance isn't rushed. It's made of actions, not just words. "Then start," she replied simply. "One day at a time." The changes started small. At first, he thought that changing meant making grand gestures, donating large sums of money, appearing at social events, posting nice phrases on social media. But little by little, he understood that the heart doesn't transform for show. It transforms inwardly. One afternoon, he suggested to his mother, "Mom, let's make lunchboxes and take them to the square. I can buy the ingredients." Regina looked carefully. She didn't want to let it become just remorse disguised as a good deed. But she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't seen in a long time. Sincerity. "Let's go," she replied. They spent the morning cooking together, something they hadn't done in years. While chopping vegetables, she talked about how hunger hurts more when it's ignored. He listened in silence. When they arrived at the square, Regina's son hesitated. The same eyes that once looked at those people with disgust now looked with shame. A woman approached. Are you the one who was here the other day?" she asked, looking at Regina with recognition. She smiled. "Yes, I am." The woman looked at the young man beside her, curious. "And this is your son?" Regina took a deep breath. "Yes," she confirmed. "And he came to learn." The woman didn't fully understand, but she smiled, accepting the lunchbox that he, head bowed, handed her. With each plate served, Regina's son felt something stir inside. It was as if, with each gaze he met, a part of his inner hardness was cracking. On one of these trips, a gentleman held his hand and said, "Thank you for remembering us. Most people pass by and pretend not to see." He swallowed hard, because for many years, he had been that majority. The days went by. The trips to the square were repeated, and the changes, previously invisible, began to be perceptible. He started calling the doorman of the building by name. He started thanking the bus driver. He started saying please and thank you to whoever served his coffee. None of this made him a saint. It didn't erase the past, but it showed that something was, in fact, being rebuilt. At home, his relationship with Regina also changed. He started asking how her day was, truly listening to her, remembering simple dates. One day, he showed up with a new sandal for her. "Remember when I was little and you used to walk around with a hole in your shoe to give me my notebook?" he asked, somewhat embarrassed. "I think it's my turn to take care of you a little." Regina held back tears, but this time, it was a different kind of tear. Because deep down, that's what she had wanted from the beginning. She didn't want a perfect son. She wanted a good man. And seeing her son striving to rediscover the goodness within himself was the greatest answer to the prayers she had silently offered for so many years. Of course, not everything was simple. There were days when he slipped up, when his impatience returned, when he made comments he later regretted. But now, something was different. He understood. And when he realized it, he backtracked. He apologized. He made amends. He was rebuilding. And that, for Regina, was real proof of change. One night, sitting at the table, he said, "You know, Mom, that day in the square, it was the worst and the best day of my life." She looked at him sweetly. "Why?" he thought before answering. "Because it was the day I discovered I wasn't who I thought I was, and the day you gave me the chance to become who I should have been all this time." Regina smiled. A tired smile, but full of peace. "You're still on the right path, my son, and that's what matters." She didn't romanticize the suffering. She didn't find what he went through beautiful. She didn't say it was worth it to be humiliated so he could learn. But I knew that, if the pain existed, at least it wasn't in vain. She looked at him as one looks at someone who has returned from a dark place. And there, in silence, she thanked God not for the pain, but for the transformation that was born from it. Because in the end, Regina didn't pretend to be homeless out of curiosity, nor for drama, nor for revenge. She did it because a mother, when she truly loves, will do even what her heart can't bear, if she believes it's the only way to save her child from himself. In the silence of the night, when Regina finally sat on the edge of her bed to rest, she realized that something inside her had also changed. It wasn't just her son who was transforming. She was too. She understood that sometimes life makes a mother go through painful paths not to punish, but to reveal what needs to be seen, even when what needs to be seen breaks her heart. The truth is that Regina never wanted to prove anything to her son. She never wanted to humiliate him, expose him, or hurt him. She only wanted to see, with her own eyes, if the boy she raised was still there, hidden beneath layers of pride, vanity, and haste. And she discovered something that many mothers discover too late. A person's character isn't revealed when they're being observed. It's revealed when they believe no one is watching. Regina faced the harshest reality a mother can face. My son knew how to be polite to me, but he didn't know how to be human with the world. And that pain, that silent wound, became the turning point in the story. Over time, she realized something even deeper. Her son wasn't born cruel. He simply forgot who he was. He got lost along the way while trying to be someone for the world, and stopped being someone for himself. And it was there, at that turning point, at that reunion, that Regina understood her true role. She wasn't trying to save her son from the streets. He wasn't trying to save her from society. He wasn't trying to save her from anyone. She was trying to save him from himself. And that kind of salvation, only a mother's love is capable of attempting, even when it hurts. Because mothers are like that. They carry guilt that isn't theirs, pain they don't deserve, and hopes that time insists on trying to erase. But inside, they have a strength that no one sees, a courage that no one values, and a love that the whole world tries to test, but never destroy. In the end, Regina learned a lesson as powerful as it was painful. Loving a child isn't about protecting them from the consequences. It's about allowing them to see the truth, even when the truth hurts. And she learned another, even more important one. The respect you teach is worth much more than the comfort you give. Her son, now changing, isn't perfect. He hasn't become a saint. He didn't transform overnight, but he's moving forward. And Regina knows that sometimes a mother's greatest victory isn't seeing her child succeed in the world. It's seeing her child overcome themselves. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how much money they have. It doesn't matter their position, status, car, or watch. What matters is their heart. It always has been. It always will be. And that's what Regina's story leaves for those listening now. A person's worth isn't in the clothes they wear, but in the respect they offer to those who have nothing. Humility is not weakness. It's the strength of those who know their own soul. The world doesn't need more rich people. It needs more human beings. And the question remains, a question that stirs, hurts, and transforms. If one day you met someone who had lost everything, how would you treat that person? And what if that someone were you? Now, a heartfelt invitation to those listening to this story. Comment, like, and follow the channel. Here, you are part of a community of women who face pain, overcome injustice, and transform hardship into strength. Every day, real stories that inspire, heal, and embrace. Because true wealth lies in character.